The figure of Mother Mary is like very, very, very highly revered in Catholicism. Many of the prayers, mention Mary or involve revering Mary. And one of the reasons is because she was a mother. She went through the process of giving birth to Jesus Christ, who is our God. I mostly just trust, the Catholic Church on matters of morality and sexual ethics. Men and women are equal, but they're not the same, and they should not always be treated the same way. You can read the Bible verse Ephesians 5:25 to 33, which says that the husband is supposed to be like a servant leader to his wife, even ready to die for her. And he can never divorce her unless in extreme circumstances such as abuse or infidelity, and he has to provide for her and take care of her for all time.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for watching and listening. Today, I have a truly passionate and interesting guest who has strong feelings about some aspects of philosophy. My guest is Amber. Um, Nice to have you here, Amber. Thanks for joining.
Thank you very much.
How do you relate to philosophy currently? What are your biggest influences?
Well, in relation to philosophy, I would say that I'm mostly influenced by Catholic philosophy. I used to be a big fan of hedonistic philosophy, but after I converted to Catholicism, I started really, really delving into Catholic philosophy specifically and really looking at philosophy from a Catholic perspective. And I really tend to agree with almost everything that the Catholic Church says and has a position on, and I can even especially argue for some of their positions. And I mostly just trust, the Catholic Church on matters of morality and sexual ethics, and that is where most of my political and social positions come from Catholicism and especially from Catholic social teaching.
I would also like to ask you which individuals from within this philosophy influenced you the most?
Well, I would say perhaps Saint Therese of Lisieux, who was an early church doctor, and there's also Saint Edith Stein, who really also delved into sexual ethics and sexual morality. So I'd say those are my two biggest influences, and their writings have like really, really influenced me in terms of Catholicism and Catholic morality, and also what it means to be a woman in Catholicism.
What is the place of a woman in society? And is the truly happiest woman a stay-at-home woman?
Well, firstly, like I said before, I tend to look at things from a Catholic perspective. So, the Catholic perspective on this is that men and women are equal, but they're not the same, and they should not always be treated the same way. So, what I love about Catholicism, specifically Catholicism's view on women, is that while Catholicism treats women as equal to men, it also understands that women have unique needs that men, that are different from men, and also seeks to have those needs met. For example, women, we get pregnant, we have menstrual cycles, we have to breastfeed after we give birth to a child, we need to heal from the pregnancy, we need to heal from the birth. So we have less physical strength than men. So up until very recently, this is something that really held women back from working the same jobs as men. Now, in modern day society, while most jobs don't really rely on physical strength, it's still, I feel that women are still advantaged in the workforce because, unlike men, we need to get pregnant, have children, breastfeed those children, and of course we deserve to be at home with our kids because, we also deserve to parent those children, and spend time with them. So Catholicism understands that, women have these needs. Women have the need to be provided for, to be protected, and to, have a loving, supportive family. So what you're supposed to do in Catholicism is that as a woman you're supposed to choose what exactly you want to do. If you want to get married, you can choose your own husband, and that husband that you get married to, in Catholicism, he is supposed to be religious, he's supposed to be kind, loving, and be like a servant leader to you. You can read the Bible verse Ephesians 5:25 to 33, which says that the husband is supposed to be like a servant leader to his wife, even ready to die for her. And he can never divorce her unless in extreme circumstances, such as abuse or infidelity, and he has to provide for her and take care of her for all time. This is what happens if a woman chooses to get married. If a woman doesn't choose to get married, she can become a nun or a religious sister. And sometimes they usually live in cloisters and get protected and provided for by the church itself, as opposed to one individual husband, right? So in this system, women's need for being provided for and being protected has been, accommodated by the church and by the Catholic men, basically. So I believe that is actually the most pro woman way to go about society, still treating women as equal to men and respecting women as equal to men, but also acknowledging that women have differences that need to be accounted for.
You've described that Catholic doctrine emphasizes individual virtues, both important in the woman and also the man, and for reasons that are related with their physical characteristics. Men typically having more strength and being a bit more typically involved in physical, manual, or demanding labor, and also as a mainstay to the workforce. And when things go wrong in terms of war or whatnot, historically it has been prevalent and has happened. Men are at their best and that they're doing their duty, they are giving their lives so that their women and children, and not just their own, but the women and children of the nation, can go on. As for the women, of course, biologically, women invest way more in the next generation than men by virtue of biology. And this is an inextricable and essential characteristic of women. Women, in my mind, are basically the gatekeepers of the next generation. And so, in that sense, women should be honored by that, because we only give creative powers to God, basically. And in that sense, women also have a bit of that creative spark, because women with only a tiny, very tiny bit of um, contribution by the men, the women does almost all the biological work of creating an individual human being.
Yeah, exactly. And when you look at the relationship in Catholicism to women, you'd see that the figure of Mother Mary is like very, very, very highly revered in Catholicism. Many of the prayers, mention Mary or involve revering Mary. And one of the reasons is because she was a mother. She went through the process of giving birth to Jesus Christ, who is our God. And this really shows us how in Catholicism mothers are so honored, because mothers go through this physical difficulty, they go through this pain to give birth to a child, and they breastfeed the child. And we as Catholics, we see that not only as such a high honor and as a gift. Personally, I see it as like a superpower, that I can, literally grow a human being in my body. And in Catholicism, we see that as such a big honor and such a big privilege, that we say a woman does not have to provide anything else. She does not have to go out and provide an income. She doesn't have to pay the bills. She doesn't have to protect the family the way a man does. Why? Because she's doing something much more important, which is actually giving birth to the children and making a family, right? So that's why I feel the position of women is so, honored in Catholicism. So when we see people, especially like modern feminists, say, oh, Catholicism just treats women like, they're incubators. But that's not true at all, because, just because we really honor women for giving birth does not mean that we think that women can only give birth. There are many nuns who, they don't get married, they don't have children, and they don't give birth, but they still help the communities in many other ways. And then, of course, we have women who they get married and they choose to voluntarily work, right? In Catholicism, as a woman, you are allowed to work as long as, the work is not so difficult, so much that you become exhausted every day. And you basically have to do it just because it's your own choice, but not because you're being forced, right? So if a woman chooses to work, whether it's, being a lawyer or being, even a comic book writer, she's free to do that. So it's not that we think that women can only contribute in terms of giving birth. It's just that we believe that that is such a big contribution, such a big honor, that a woman doesn't even have to contribute anything else other than just taking care of her children and taking care of the house. And I feel like that is a good way to look at things, because as women, we shouldn't have to do everything. We shouldn't have to, like, give birth to children, take care of them, take care of the house while also working, because that is also wrong, because it puts so much pressure, on the woman to do all of these things that she shouldn't have to do.
Yeah, and even to go to a few examples of women having such an important role, not just on giving birth, of giving life to a human being, but also being literally their first teachers consistently throughout history. We have seen examples of individuals of excellence, and that excellence can be traced back to their own mothers. So, for instance, Marcus Aurelius, the wise emperor, who embraced Greek philosophy and studied almost all Greek philosophy available to him, and wanted to better himself. Uh, this path of attainment of virtue started with his mother, who had the wisdom to get the best tutors for him since an early age, and to guide him and help him build his character to be a person of worth, not just a technically proficient person, but a good person, a person with moral virtues. And this is in part what explains, I think, individuals that are historically important, that have done things of worth in history. Another example that isn't so is a bit more aggressive was Alexander of Macedon. His mother also played a huge role in who he became, and she also insisted for him to get the best teachers available. One of those was Aristotle. And so, for me, behind each great man, typically there are also wise women. Uh, that might likely be their mothers, but not always. Sometimes, for instance, in the example of Socrates, beyond his mother, there were also other women like Aspasia and Diotima, who were wise in the ways of speaking, rhetoric, or that they were wise regarding Platonic love. And so, if not for these wise women giving a perspective that comes from heightened sensibility that women can give to wisdom, I honestly doubt that Socrates or Marcus Aurelius would be as excellent individuals as they were. And so I think that it's important to keep in mind the important role and the foundational role that mothers have.
Yes. Yeah, a mother's role is extremely important in the child's life. And, that's why, we as Catholics, we believe that for the woman, if she's given birth, she deserves to be able to stay at home with her children and spend time with her children every single day so she can bring them up and teach them, even in some cases, homeschool them, because that's extremely important for a child. And I've listened to women who have just given birth and they say, I want nothing more than to stay at home with my child, but unfortunately, I have to go back to work, in a couple weeks. And to me, I think that's so sad. If a woman does choose, maybe 1 or 2 years after she's given birth to her child to go back to work, I wouldn't have a problem with it. But a woman should have the choice to stay at home, with her children, because, the way I view, life in general, it's not just about how much money you make or how successful you are or how much you learn. It's also like the most important thing apart from serving God is how to find happiness and how to be happy. How much joy can you get out of life? Not from a hedonistic point of view, but people deserve to be happy, you know? Women deserve to be happy. Women deserve to, be with their children. So I believe that, women's empowerment is not just about, how much is the woman making, and things like that. It's also about, does she have the freedom to stay at home, with her family if she wants to.
To build on that, I agree with you. We usually measure the success in society, and this is unfortunate, in a very narrow-minded, materialistic way. How much money are people making, or how much money people have in their bank account, while completely ignoring moral virtue and character traits. There are people of worth in society that might even be very modest and modestly employed, but they are kind and show love towards their fellow humans, regardless of their tradition, regardless of that coming from Catholicism or Hinduism or Islam or any other tradition or religion. If people are connected to that higher power, and they let that higher power flow through them in the form of kindness, love, charity, um, isn't that worth praising? And this is such an important, I believe, characteristic of mothers. They have a defenseless child that is born almost incapacitated. Biologically, human beings are kind of born preterm, even if they are born after a gestation of 9 months. This is because of the size of the head. They need to be born early in comparison with other mammals who are born like baby giraffes are born and then they stand in the same day. Well, it would be completely ludicrous to expect that from a human baby. And so this heightens even more the importance of the very first caretaker of a human being that has just been born. There are two phenomena happening in society that are unfortunately contributing for people to be raised without so much excellence as they deserve to have and as society needs them to have. When I talk about excellence, I'm talking about not just the intellect, but also moral virtue and character traits, creativity, etc. Which is schools. People are over relying on institutional schools, which are by very definition less humane than the tutoring that a mother could give, that a loving mother could give, um, or um, or they simply don't individualize care as much, and they cannot because these institutions are designed to be kind of like economies of scale. There are classes with 20 to 30 children that are crewed by a teacher, or sometimes when children are older have multiple teachers. And even if the teacher tries their best, the teacher cannot give attention to each individual child in the same way as a mother, a loving mother would. And of course, not forgetting the role of a father as well. Um, and at the same time, besides people relying too much, in my opinion, on schools, on schooling and preschools and nurseries and kindergarten, because mothers are kind of forced or encouraged or convinced or manipulated to go and join the workforce and work at least 8 hours a day, if not more. There is also um, there is also this that I've just described, which is uh, women are not encouraged to be full time mothers and be mothers and until at least their children can gain a good foundation of what it means to be a human being, besides what schools are conceived to give them. Schools, of course, focus much more on the intellect and not so much on virtues and character traits that mothers can give. And so I think this is worth pointing out, and it's worth addressing.
Yeah, it is. It is 100% worth addressing because, you know, I feel that society in general, a country is made up of families, right? So, families are the building blocks of society. So, if we have in a family, two parents working, not getting enough time to spend together as a couple, their children not having enough time with their parents, both of them being stressed out, the children being neglected somewhat, um, as a result of that, then we're going to have a society that is not very good, right? But if we have a society where one person, given that the vast majority of couples are heterosexual couples, the man is out working full time, taking care of his family, doing his masculine duties. The woman is taking care of the home full time. She's taking care of the children, maybe even educating them a little bit at home as well, even if it's just the first few years. We're going to see a higher quality society, right? Men and women will be happy because they will have an identity, right? A lot of men and women these days are suffering because they feel like they do not have an identity. A lot of people say, what does it mean to be a man? What does it mean to be a woman? In the past, we had, clear distinctions. And yes, one could argue they were restrictive, but also it's gone so far the other way that people are now confused and they feel like they have no identity anymore.
I would even add to that people they are mistaken or deluded that they only need to feel happy to have a good life. But if people don't feel any purpose, or that they feel that they don't have any mission or direction or raison d'être in their lives, they kind of tend to fall either into an enlightened hedonism and stay there for a while, or outright nihilism. And I think we're seeing that with, for instance, young boys that are 20 something years old already, but they still haven't risen themselves out of the dependency of their parents yet. And they are kind of maturing later and later, while girls are at least and this is my limited perspective, because of course I'm a man, at least there seems to be some pattern of kind of encouraging them to pay only attention to their outward appearance or their physical appearance, and not so much to kind of learn philosophy, which I think is a great mistake. Because if women are to be the very first teachers of their children, it's really damn important that they know about virtue, that they know about what it means to be a good human being, to kind of transmit, even if not by speech, but by their way of being as a mother to their children. this is really really important, kind of social connections at work that need to be reestablished if they are being lost, and we, I think, both um, believe that they are at risk of really being lost. People have become more secular, but maybe they have thrown the baby off with the bathwater. They are kind of are turning their backs to churches or to institutionalized religion, um, but they should stay with virtue and where supposedly virtue comes from. As I've mentioned to you, I was during a period of my life an atheist, but now I like to consider myself a person that asks questions, and some of those questions probably will never be answered. Like, what does it mean to think about God, or who or what is God really? How can we relate to God? So I think I will think about these kinds of questions my entire life, and I probably will never answer them. But I think what is important is to keep thinking about these things and to keep devoting ourselves to the sublime, to whatever is the most divine, the most perfect conceivable thing that we can imagine. And if we can do that, we can, I think, become better persons. And this, just to go back to women and their role in society. Thus, I would argue for definitely that all people should learn philosophy, especially the philosophy that is focused on improving the character, and especially women because they are the first teachers of their children.
Yeah, exactly. And women in particular, if you look at studies, have been getting unhappier since the 1970s, right? And it's reached a stage where women feel kind of lost, because they're being pulled in all sorts of directions. And I can attest to this as a woman, because as women we meet a lot of people who say, okay, you should get married and become a housewife. That is the traditional thing to do. And I myself, I want that sort of lifestyle. So I do want to become a traditional housewife. But then when you say that, people, they tell you, no, actually now we're changing our mind. You should work full time, be independent and everything. And then for the women who do want that lifestyle, they're told, no, you should be a traditional housewife instead. So there's a lot of back and forth, especially when you're a woman, on people telling you what to do, and what is supposed to make you happy and things like that. And in modern day society, it's very very difficult, because individualism is becoming more and more popular. We're taught to think only of ourselves and what we personally want to do, not what the collective society wants or needs. And I feel that's also wrong, because one of the key ways to make yourself happy is to have a positive impact on other people's lives. The time when I was most depressed was when I felt like I wasn't contributing anything to the world. I wasn't making anyone's life better by existing. I wasn't making anyone happy. And the happiest times I've been is when I was seeing, that my existence was having a positive impact on people. So, and this is not just for women, but for men as well. When I look at young men today, I feel so sorry for them, because, you know, in the past, right, in maybe like the 1950s and before, if you were a young man and you were working 40 hours a week, that could give you, a wife who was a stay at home wife who would, take care of the home for you. You could have maybe one or two children, eventually buy a house and buy a car. But these days, the young men just work 40 hours a week or even more, and then come home to nothing and no one. Or if they happen to have a girlfriend or a wife, she's working full time as well, and that's their life. So many of them cannot afford to have children, or ever buy a house or retire. So I believe that is also really, causing the rates of depression to increase, because people need more out of life than, just working 40 hours a week. They want to have families, they want to, achieve something, they want to, build a fulfilling life, and they can't do that, you know by just working constantly, right? So I feel, the key to women's happiness especially is not so much, is it being a housewife or is it working full time. It's them having the choice to do either one of those things without fear of judgment, and also to understand that at the end of the day, you know, what they're doing is contributing to society. Whether you're a housewife and contributing in terms of taking care of the home, taking care of children, or whether you're a full-time worker and you're contributing to society by being, in the labor force, it should all be seen as, a good thing to do, right? Now, when it comes to like why I specifically disagree with feminism, especially liberal feminism, right? I don't want people to get confused. I'm not against women having rights to vote or work or anything like that. When I say I'm against feminism, I mean I'm specifically against liberal feminism. Why? Because liberal feminism promotes this very, very, very toxic, view of women, of gender roles, of men as well. We're told that as a woman, you're almost the exact same as a man, and your only worth, is how similar you are to a man. So, don't have children, don't have a traditional view of marriage, just get a job, work full time, you know, and if a man wants to be chivalrous to you, he wants to open doors for you, that's a benevolent misogyny, so you have to be against that. We're told that, there's nothing wrong with being, a prostitute, or going on these sites where you sell, naked pictures of yourself, despite the fact that is very, very harmful to women, and it's now being sold as something that's okay. We're told, take contraception, and if you get pregnant, have an abortion, so that, the guy that you're sleeping with doesn't have any consequences, you know so there's a lot of reasons why I'm against liberal feminism. And it's mainly the fact that they're trying to make women as much as men as possible, until like they feel like that, we're exactly like men, that we don't have any unique differences or advantages that are unique to us specifically, and that I feel is harmful to both men and women.
Yeah, it seems to me that there is a streak of unenlightened hedonism in liberal feminism, and it is emphasized on materialism. So, as you described, women who become convinced of liberal feminism or the liberal feminist lifestyle, they end up pursuing a path that, if many people pursue, would probably lead to a collapse in birth rates. And then a few generations afterwards, people will kind of be perplexed because society is mostly composed of elderly citizens that needs to be taken care of and need resources in healthcare and pensions and whatnot, and they no longer can continue participating in the workforce. While there are very few young people to keep things running, which is has happened in Japan and Northern Europe, especially. But other nations like Southern and Western Europe and North America seem to be trending in this same path. Uh, there was in the past, when the Soviet Union was created, a huge emphasis on making women and equal to men in the workforce. It's even quite a stereotypical thing of the Soviet society to see men and women both working in construction and other demanding labor demanding things. So this society kind of went really hard on this. And it also was hand in hand with their departure from their version of Christianity, which was more of the Orthodox Church. But things have went full swing, and now the current Russia is has decriminalized house what's its name, house abuse, or abuse against wives. So they went fully in the other direction. The woman is supposed to keep their mouth shut, and the man can oppress her and whatnot, and they are completely against non-heterosexual relationships, and they are expressing themselves to the world as a very conservative society. However, as we can see, we must be mindful of the extremes in these things. So uh, we don't want to see the extreme of women completely foregoing their blessing of being able to give birth to the next generations. And we also don't want to have a society in which half of the population is being silenced and oppressed and having arbitrarily less rights, even though women are perfectly capable of thinking politically and philosophically just like men. And so it is, of course, it makes some sense there to be some equality, but with an awareness of the differences in biology in women and men.
Yeah, yeah, I agree 100%. Ultimately, I believe that, the answer is, it's not either, oppressing women so much and seeing women as, just people to oppress, and it's also not just viewing women as exactly the same as men. I believe the true way to respect and honor women is to acknowledge that we are equal to men, but also that, we have, unique differences that, need to be, accounted for, right? So when I was younger and I was first learning about feminism, I also believed, about them. You know what they used to say, that, women don't have, any natural desire to, be homemakers or to have children, that it is just something that society has brainwashed into women, and, that gender roles are bad and things like that. But, as I grew up and I also, really, really, kind of had discussions with myself and kind of like focused on what I was feeling, I realized very much that I did naturally want to get married. I did naturally want to have children. And I did naturally want to take on, a homemaker slash housewife role. And that is not a bad thing. It is not bad for women to have a natural desire to have children, and it's not bad for women to have a natural desire to want to get married and to be in a loving marriage, because, to be loved, whether in a romantic way or a platonic way, it is a natural human desire, right? So it is not something that is brainwashed into people, it is something that is natural. And if a woman naturally does not have that inclination and she wants to work and have a completely equal relationship, that is perfectly fine. But for those people who feel that naturally they want to take on a more traditional role, they should be allowed to. But what I don't like is, nowadays in liberal feminism, the idea that traditional gender roles are not natural at all. It was just something that was pushed onto women. and that sort of attitude that we hear today. And that is just my honest opinion, that it is something that God, naturally designed for men and women. And while there are some exceptions, it is ultimately, good and natural to have traditional gender roles, in society. I'm Of course, it should not be forced. No one should force anyone, into anything. But we don't have to label it as something bad or something unnatural as well. It should just be something that people, choose for themselves, right? If you look at studies, they show that with an increase in labor force participation, a woman's life satisfaction rate goes down. There are many studies that prove this. I even have links for them, and they show that housewives are consistently less stressed and happier than women who work full time. And also, we see the same studies showing that men who are married to housewives are happier than men who are married to women who work full time. And children are better off, with a stay at home mom than with a mom who works full time. So, what we see consistently is that women prefer to stay home, men prefer their wives to stay home, and children prefer their moms to stay home. This is not the same the other way around. When a man wants to stay at home and be a house husband, that's totally fine. I'm fine with that if a couple chooses to do that. But what we see is that a woman becomes less attracted to him, and doesn't, usually they end up divorcing, or most of the time they end up divorcing, right? More often than, the other way around. So, there might be couples out there who say, okay, I'm a woman, I work full time, my husband stays at home, and I'm happy with this arrangement. That's fine. But in general, people would be happier, with more traditional gender roles. And this doesn't have to be a bad thing, because we should still make sure that the woman is not being abused, that she can leave in case she's being abused, and things like that. That is not the problem. But if a woman has a loving, supportive husband, who provides for her and allows her to be a housewife, and she's happy to do that, then that should not be seen as something that has been brainwashed into this woman, and should not be seen as, a taboo or something that is stigmatized, you know? So I believe that would really, really increase women's happiness, because I've met so many women that tell me, I would love to be a housewife and I would love to stay at home full time or stay with my kids full time, but we can't afford it, So that is my main issue. That is what I feel, is a problem. That is, let me just read you this one quote from this study that I viewed. Yeah. So this is from Coaster 2009, the study. The hard won freedom of choice has imprisoned women. I just see an exhausted generation trying to do it all. I have no choice. I have to work. I don't love my career. My childminder is taking half my salary, and I'd rather bring up my children myself, but I can't afford to. So this is from the same study that shows that, women, are happier being full-time homemakers, right? And that it's not having the choice to be housewives that is actually making women unhappy, right? So, in general, I believe, the best thing would be to destigmatize, gender roles and allow them for people that, that want to practice those roles.
I would also like to do a reading for you as well, and it's very much related to women's rights and their roles in society as well. It's from an individual whose birth date will make 2,000 years in 2 years. I'm talking about Musonius Rufus, who was a philosophy teacher in Rome, and probably his lectures are mostly his responses to someone's question. And probably someone asked him, "Should women learn philosophy just the same as men?" And so he replied this: "Women have received from the gods the same ability to reason that men have. We men employ reasoning in our relations with others, and so far as possible in everything we do, whether it is good or bad, or noble or shameful. Likewise, women have the same senses as men: sight, hearing, smell, and all the rest. Likewise, each has the same parts of the body, neither sex has more than the other. In addition, it is not men alone who possess eagerness and the natural inclination towards virtue, but women also. Women are pleased no less than men by noble and just deeds, and reject the opposite of such actions. Since that is so, why is it appropriate for men to seek out and examine how they might live well, that is, to practice philosophy, but not women? Is it fitting for men to be good but not women? And then Musonius will go on to say that even though women in that age were mostly house managers, and in Rome, women would even have to manage in upper classes, would also have to manage the slaves employed in the house, and they would have to manage a lot of things that are happening at the house. And so Musonius Rufus argued for having so much duties beyond just giving birth and raising two children. It's really important for them to also have these character traits, noble character traits, that kind of learning from the wisest people can give them. And so I found it really interesting that something 2000, almost 2000 years ago, was said that neither goes to one extreme or to the other. He wants women to have their autonomous capacity of thought, and before him, Plato as well said that for a society, a kind of industrious society or city, to be able to produce everything even beyond the essential needs, they would need to teach also women the same things as men, and women would need to kind of have the option to participate. But Plato, I think, went a bit more extreme. He wanted to end the nuclear family and have the children kind of not knowing exactly who their exact mothers were, and everyone raises the children, or rather, all the children are of all this community. So it went in a great extreme, and I think it's impractical because people want to develop bonds of affection with their children.
Yeah, people, that has been tried before, not just in Plato's case, but also in this other case called the Kibbutz tribe in Israel, and in other examples as well, where they had this idea of creating a communal society where, children were raised, communally, as opposed to a single mother and a single father. And in almost every single time that it has tried, it just doesn't work, because especially mothers really need to spend time with their children, and fathers as well, they want to spend time with their children, and people want to have their own families. And personally, I would not like this setup at all. If my child was to be raised communally and it didn't see me as a unique mother, but rather just some woman in the society, or that I didn't have any husband, and I didn't have any, like, a specific partner, I would not like to live that life at all. So it's just not something that people would be happy with, I feel.
Yeah, there's also another example from ancient times, also from Plato, but it was a conversation between Socrates and a man called Meno. And so when Socrates asks Meno, what is virtue? What constitutes virtue, which is something that is extremely abstract. And when Socrates asks Meno, what is virtue? Instead of defining it, Meno gives an example. And the example Meno gives is a woman that stays at home and is kind of faithful to her husband and whatnot. And Socrates, in response, doesn't say anything against this example. So he kind of shows his assent to this example, but he says that an example is not what he's looking for. He wants a kind of a clear cut definition. But this was the perspective of in the West, in the ancient West, of women's participation in societies. In ancient Greece, also, women would manage the home. They would, of course, engage in economical activities, mostly related to textiles and garment production and whatnot. So they would be weavers and etc. While men would engage much more in agriculture. And so it is kind of intriguing that if you would be able to travel to the past and see people in ancient Greece, you would see the husband quite tanned and dark, while the woman would be quite a bit more pale.
Yeah, yeah. I've seen that. Yeah, I've seen anthropologists talk about that a lot.
Also, another example that I found of gender roles, but in ancient India, is from the Hindu epic Ramayana, that describes Rama as being the lawful successor to his father, who has decided to give him the succession because he is so noble and virtuous. However, a stepmother of Rama's plotted against that and arranged for him to convince his father by a debt that his father had to this woman. Um, she asked. She had the chance to wish two things from the king, and so she wished for Rama to be banished to the forest for 14 years, and also for her own son to be crowned king. Her son who wasn't even there, so um, she was kind of going for her son's interest without even speaking with him because he wasn't there. Her son Bharat, and so when Rama had to go to the forest, he was willing to go alone, but two people went with him by completely sheer choice. His wife, Sita, she decided to let go of all the luxury she had as being a princess, um, joined him in the forest, and his own brother. And the curious thing about his own brother deciding to go was that his brother's wife, she decided to stay in the kingdom, in the palace, and not accompany Rama's brother called Lakshman to this exile, 14-year exile to the forest. And so, without stating it clearly in this epic myth, it clearly shows that Sita is a much more devoted wife that chooses to adopt the same fate as her husband. No matter what, she joined him in good times and bad times, and her husband Rama was kind of impressed, and he didn't expect her to go with him. He didn't even want to impose this exile on his wife, but he was happy that her devotion went so far. And so I found this epic myth that is very large. It's very expensive. It shows virtue both in men and women, and it shows a very nice relationship between men and women without clearly showing misogyny or the other side around. So yeah, I thought it was a really interesting example.
But thank you so much for having this discussion with me and inviting me on your show. I hope you learned and had a good perspective from someone who is a little bit unique in her perspective. So thank you so much.
Likewise, thank you so much for joining and sharing so much of your knowledge and wisdom. I think I've learned much with you, and I hope the viewers too will learn